Testing 1, 2. I'm looking at my PowerPoint. Happily, it's not up there, but it says I should give subtitles a try. Make this presentation more inclusive by turning on subtitles. I have no idea what that means. I know what a subtitle is, but how it would make things more inclusive is, well, never mind. Let's stand and pledge allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please be seated. Lynn made a big enough deal about this tonight that I decided not to wear a ball cap. I like my ball caps. When they take pictures of me without a ball cap, the light shines off my forehead. I wear ball caps largely because I'm vain, but that's all right. Lynn Heller is going to make a special presentation this evening. Welcome, if you would, Lynn Heller. Yes. You want that?
Sure. No, I don't want that.
Okay.
I don't want this closed.
No, you don't want that closed.
Put this here.
Yes.
Go away.
Okay.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Yes? So welcome. We have several guests here with us this evening. Would you all like to please stand up so we can give you a good old Civil War Roundtable round of applause? Yay. Welcome to you. You sure you can hear me okay? All right. So we have a very special honored guest here tonight. Wendy Allen is here with her special guests to receive our Cal Doucette Achievement Award presented by the Gettysburg Civil War Roundtable. So I'm going to read you a little bit about Wendy with my glasses on. Wendy is founder, coordinator, and presenter of Gettysburg Moving and Popular 100 Nights of Taps, which opening night is on Monday, 7 o'clock at the cemetery, Soldiers National Monument. 100 Nights of Taps, which honors the fallen soldiers laid to rest in the Gettysburg National Cemetery, and also she is nationally acclaimed Lincoln artist, the only known artist who devotes herself passionately to one subject, Abraham Lincoln. She has completed over 500 paintings of the president, whose presence here in Gettysburg has been significant since 1863. Wendy is the president of the Lincoln Fellowship of Pennsylvania, which is committed to honoring the legacy and memory of President Abraham Lincoln, and which commemorates the Gettysburg Address during the Dedication Day ceremonies on November 19th at the Soldiers National Cemetery. Can you imagine if that was just one of your jobs to do? The fellowship also maintains the return visit statue, there it is, on Lincoln Square, and is a co-sponsor of 100 Nights of Taps. She is also on the board of advisors of Gettysburg Lincoln Forum, which endeavors to enhance the understanding and preserve the memory of Abraham Lincoln through symposiums, tours, and awards, which recognize special contributions to the field of Lincoln studies. If that isn't enough, in 2019, she was awarded the YWCA's Business Woman of the Year Award and has been presented with the keys to the borough of Gettysburg. Will those keys get me some free parking, do you think? Yeah. And quote, when she was given that award, quote, "In grateful appreciation for her commitment and dedication to the community of Gettysburg, its history, its vibrancy, and its future." The award that we are presenting tonight was inspired by the devotion to Gettysburg by longtime Roundtable member Cal Doucette, who was a beloved volunteer contributor to everyone's Gettysburg experience. Among the criteria established by our roundtable to determine deserving recipients are outstanding individuals who engage in activities which enhance the visitor's experience, devote their time and energy to the community, contribute to the understanding of the significant role Gettysburg played in the American Civil War, and honoring the brave soldiers who fought here. There is no doubt that Wendy Allen ticks all those boxes. Wendy was born and raised in Pittsburgh, and in college majored in history and political science. After a 35-year career in educational publishing, art had become Wendy's passion. She painted her first portrait of Lincoln in 1983. Even though she'd never had an art lesson, she tried her hand at painting, using her windowsill as an easel. Early attempts, she admits, were amateurish. That all changed after a trip from California to visit her younger sister at Gettysburg College. That visit coincided with the college's Civil War Institute, which inspired her to devote her art to painting Lincoln. To Wendy, Lincoln's face is both familiar and comforting. It symbolizes humanity, wisdom, and moral courage. Her hope is that by transforming the black and white images of the past, her art will keep Lincoln within our grasp. She wants people to see him as a modern figure, still powerful and relevant, and with much to teach us. He never ceases to inspire her. Wendy says, quote, "I think of each canvas as the place where I can explore Lincoln's compassion, courage, and determination, using artistic tools like composition, color, and texture." Unquote. She is keeping his legacy alive through her art. Wendy's work has been featured at the Historical Society of Washington, D.C., at museums in Florida, Maryland, New York, and our very own Majestic Theater. At that exhibition, Jeffrey Gable, founding executive director of the Majestic, said of Wendy, quote, "Not only is she an artist with a singularly unique vision, Wendy is also a community treasure who tirelessly volunteers her time to many worthwhile nonprofit organizations which make Gettysburg a top tourist destination." Harold Holzer, whose complete resume would take up half of our program, is a distinguished writer and lecturer and one of the country's leading authorities on Abraham Lincoln. Harold is the chairman of the Lincoln Forum. Wendy has worked with him for many years and is on the board of advisors of the Lincoln Forum. When asked, he readily sent to me his comments about Wendy, and I would like to read his letter. Wendy Allen has not only illuminated the world of Abraham Lincoln with her consummate artistry, she has tangibly enriched the Gettysburg community and National Military Park, both with her gallery's prominence in the center of town and her commitment and devotion to the honored dead who gave the last full measure of devotion at Gettysburg. Wendy's Nights of Taps bring Civil War scholars and students together every summer evening at the National Cemetery to remember the fallen, adding pageantry and majesty to the scene, and providing a sublime extra added attraction to visitors from around the nation. Harold says, "I was privileged to serve as the historian guest at one such evening, and it was a deeply moving, unforgettable experience, enriched by Wendy's presence and the soulful bugle music that floats through the air to pay tribute to those who fell there. I admire and applaud Wendy as a gifted painter, as a tireless community booster, and as a leader of the Lincoln Fellowship and 100 Nights of Taps. In so many ways, Wendy has enhanced the timeless appeal of the village and its sacred ground. I am proud to join those who are saluting her with this much-deserved award. As I've said on more than one occasion, Wendy is a work of art." Harold Holzer. And did we mention 100 Nights of Taps? Yari Villanueva, the bugler coordinator for 100 Nights, is considered the country's foremost expert on military bugle calls, and his resume would complete the other half of our program. He heads the Taps for Veterans and founded Taps Across America, both of which 100 Nights of Taps Gettysburg promoted. The daily taps performed at the World War I Memorial was also inspired by the 100 Nights of Taps. I would like to read the letter that he sent me about Wendy. There have been many people who have inspired me on my career as a musician and as a leader. Wendy is certainly one of these people. I first met Wendy in the spring of 2017. She had called to seek help in putting together a program for the Gettysburg National Park. Her idea was to have taps sounded each evening during the summer months in the National Cemetery. Wendy had been inspired by the daily sounding of Last Post at the Menin Gate in Ypres, Belgium, where they have performed this nightly ritual since 1927 as a tribute to the Commonwealth soldiers who died during World War I to preserve that town. Wendy's thought was to do the same by honoring Americans who have served our nation with a nightly tribute expressed through the 24 notes of our nation's most solemn bugle call. Wendy had been working on this project for many years and finally got the nod to start the program beginning Memorial Day 2017. What began as a short musical tribute has grown to a sponsored program which attracts a large following every evening between Memorial Day and Labor Day. It has become one of the most, if not the most, well-attended of the National Park Service programs in Gettysburg. Wendy gathered a team of volunteers who faithfully help run the program each evening. Wendy oversees the public affairs and social media and coordinates the performers. I am truly amazed at her energy and leadership, both in the 100 Nights of Taps and with the Lincoln Fellowship. Yari Villanueva. A highly regarded feature, there's John. A highly regarded and special feature of the 100 Nights is the time in the program that all veterans, active service members, and members of the National Guard present are invited to come forward so that they can be recognized and thanked for their service. At this time, we would like to thank you, Wendy, for all your contributions to our community, for bringing the impressive and poignant 100 Nights of Taps to Gettysburg, and for your dedication to keeping the legacy and ideals of President Lincoln alive through your magnificent artwork. From her, Lincoln, into Art Gallery on Baltimore Street, along the very route Lincoln took on his way to deliver the most famous speech in American history, she says, "There isn't a day that goes by that I don't look out my window and think about Lincoln passing by this building." So now I would like to invite Wendy to come up so that I can award her and have the privilege of presenting her with the award. I'll take my glasses off and we'll take a picture.
Those are mine, and I can't do a thing without them. Thank you, Lynn, President Davis, Vice President Hessler. I accept this award with humility, gratitude, and a full heart. To be recognized by this esteemed organization whose membership is a who's who's of scholarship, also my friends, which is really nice. Scholarship is indeed an honor. I'm afraid I'm going to have to repeat some of what Lynn said, but why not? Because I'm president of the fellowship and I must do things like that. I do currently serve as the president of the Lincoln Fellowship of Pennsylvania. The fellowship honors the legacy and memory of President Abraham Lincoln and commemorates the Gettysburg Address and the rededication of the Gettysburg National Cemetery. We strive to educate the public about the history related to President Lincoln and the National Cemetery and advance our nation's highest values and principles. Through our programs and events, we want to promote positive civic engagement as reflected in the words and actions of Abraham Lincoln. This Monday, Memorial Day, the most sacred day of remembrance, the Lincoln Fellowship of Pennsylvania will commence its 8th season of 100 Nights of Taps, Gettysburg. Superintendent Christina Heister and Lieutenant General Christopher F. Birney, who's retired from the United States Air Force, will be speaking. The Gettysburg Choral Society, the first time with joining us for taps, will be performing along with many distinguished buglers and trumpeters. The evening will conclude with cascading taps sounded by buglers stationed throughout the cemetery under the direction of the nation's foremost expert on bugle calls, Yari Villanueva. This moving program features 2 educational components, beginning at 5:30 each evening, and I know he's here tonight in the back. Representatives from the Gettysburg licensed battlefield guides offer a free interpretive program exploring the aftermath of the Battle of Gettysburg and the creation of the National Cemetery in Gettysburg, and they conclude at Soldiers National Monument. That's when our formal TAPS program begins at 7, with representatives from the Lincoln Fellowship, guest National Park Service Rangers, and licensed battlefield guides offer brief historical vignettes called Enduring Pathways. These focus on Lincoln, the Gettysburg Address, the history of TAPS, the Soldiers National Monument, with topics changing nightly. We also recognize and thank veterans. You saw and active service members and members of the National Guard in the audience. And I must say, that element of the program, we didn't have it for a while. Oh, hi, Teresa, I didn't see you come in. How are you? That part of the program was thought up by our Vice President, Ken Kimes, and it was a genius move and just a nice element of the whole program. I want to give him full credit because it was a beautiful suggestion. We will also be honoring this year 2nd Lieutenant Edmund Dascom, 2nd New Hampshire Volunteer Infantry, buried in Soldiers National Cemetery, and we will be placing a flag on his grave and telling his story every evening. He has a great story. And that's Teresa. Thank you, Teresa, for bringing him. The Lincoln Fellowship of Pennsylvania and the Gettysburg National Military Park are now co-sponsors for 100 Nights of TAPS Gettysburg, in partnership with TAPS for Veterans, the licensed battlefield guides, and the Eisenhower National Historic Site. The program again begins at 7 p.m. at Soldiers National Monument in Gettysburg National Cemetery. And there are friends here tonight who are directly responsible for this program with all their help, and I want them to be recognized as well, because I couldn't do it by myself. I want to thank John Tuskin. John, just please stand, and Sandy Tuskin. My wonderful sister, Amy Woodis, is here. She volunteers as well. Ron Parashow's here. Ron. Susan Iliano is here. Please, Susan is here. Thank you, Susan. I have very dedicated donors. I'd like to recognize Kay and Stephen Getty are here. Thank you. And they also feed me fabulous food when I go to their house. Kay is one heck of a good cook. On a personal note, I am delighted to announce that this is my business and my current art side, and tonight I'm excited to announce, and this is the first announcement, that I'm working on an exciting new project. I have been hired to write and produce a documentary that will tell the story of Abraham Lincoln and the artist G.P.A. Healy in 1860 through creating a piece of art, and it's going to be a portrait of Lincoln, using the style and techniques and some materials that were used in the mid-19th century. I am working with Jake Board on this, and we've got the script, well, not we, I have the script just about all ready to go, and we're going to start filming shortly. I'm really excited. I met with Jake today, and we had a fun meeting, and he's fun to work with. We will begin filming sometime this summer. The research for this has been very, very interesting, and I'm really excited about being able to share it once it's done. In closing, thank you again to the Civil War Roundtable of Gettysburg. I also want to thank and introduce my other good friends here tonight. It's so great to see them. Linda and Larry Taylor, they're in the back. As some of you know, Larry served as ambassador to Estonia. and was also a past president of the Lincoln Fellowship of Pennsylvania, which is very cool. And Linda's been a great friend for many, 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 many years. I think like over 25 now, right, Linda? Something like that. Something, if not more. Elaine would know that, right? Susan Eisenhower is here tonight. Thank you, Susan, for coming. It's really wonderful to have you here. Thank you. Lois Starkey, who I love. Where's Lois? Yes, we've been very good friends. I walked into her gallery when she was Gallery 30 with canvases, cold, put them out around her gallery and asked her if I could sell them at her gallery. And she said, sure, why not? You know. So we've had a very strong friendship since, and I just adore her to death. And I also want to thank, of course, my partner of 43 years, Elaine Henderson, who took me to Ypres, Belgium, where I got the inspiration for the 100 Nights of Taps. Thank you. And thank you for putting up with my never being around. So again, thank you very much. It's a real honor. Thank you.
Isn't that cool? Got one work of art, celebrating another work of art, and then there's me. Dave Diner, tell us about what we're doing with our money.
Thank you, Bruce. I'm going to cut to the bone. Greetings on behalf of myself. We have total assets of $23,590.84 as of 3 o'clock this afternoon. We have total revenue of $3,040.08, total expenses of $2,699.29 for an overall net income year-to-date $340.79.
Very good. We have the best treasurer's reports going. Well, there's the report. Roger, tell us what's coming up.
On the screen are the summer programs. I have a handout. If you didn't get one, see me at the end, and I'll give you one. You can hang this on your refrigerator and not miss any of our summer programs. The first one is Saturday morning on June the 8th at 9:30. It will be over at by noon, so you can have lunch. And Fred is a longtime member of our Roundtable and a longtime member of the board of directors of our Roundtable. So those are our summer programs. They're going to be terrific, I'm sure. And I don't need to say anything else.
Thank you, sir.
Oh, yeah, we're starting them at 7:30 now?
6:30.
Oh, I'm sorry. We're starting them at 6:30 now. We previously always started at 6 o'clock. We're starting at 6:30 now. They'll be over when they're over. They're members. They're Freedom members. We invite guests who are not members, but if you come and you're not a member, we would really appreciate a free will donation. That's it, I think.
Thank you, sir. Michelle, would you introduce our featured speaker for the evening?
Good evening, everybody. Nice to see you all here. And I just want to, as an aside, before I speak with the introduction, I was honored enough to actually meet Wendy the very first year of 100 Nights of Taps. My son was one of the very first buglers who came out and did that. And we didn't really know much about it. We just saw a little blurb in the paper, and we came out, and Wendy told us all about what the program was, and I just remember being just blown away. by the whole concept. It was a great thing. Okay, our speaker tonight. I'm so excited to welcome her here, Lisa G. Samia. Hopefully I just said that right. I tried to practice, but is an award-winning poet and author who researches, writes, and lectures on American Civil War history. Her latest accomplishments are being selected as the National Parks Arts Foundation's Artist in Residence for Gettysburg National Military Park 2020 and National Park Service Artist in Residence for Manassas National Battlefield Park in 2021, both for her Civil War poetry. Her works include The Nameless and the Faceless of the Civil War, released in 2018, a collection of 28 poems and 28 essays on the historical representations of Civil War events through the rhyme and narrative of poetry. The 2019, The Nameless and Faceless Women of the Civil War, and her most recent book released in May 2023, The Nameless and the Faceless of the Civil War, Gettysburg, Manassas, and more. Also, The Man with the Ice Blue Eyes, a romantic poetry collection of love and heartache, debuted at #1 on Amazon for women's poetry in July 2016. She is currently working on a 4th Civil War poetry essay book under the Nameless and Faceless of the Civil War collection. And it does look like she has all of her books over here in the corner. And so I'm sure that after our presentation is over, she would be more than happy to sell you a copy, or if you already have a copy here, I'm sure she would be glad to sign those for you. Lisa is also an avid author and speaker on John Wilkes Booth and his sister, Asia Booth Clark. She has appeared multiple times at Tudor Hall, Bel Air, Maryland, the Booth family home. Her recent discovery of a set of archived letters written by Asia Booth Clark while residing in Europe provides a deeper reveal of Asia Booth Clark. Also, a future biography of Asia, her life, and her letters is Lisa's next project. Lisa frequently lectures at literary and historical venues, notably the Edgar Allan Poe House and Museum, the Dr. Samuel A. Mudd House and Museum, the Civil War Interpretive Center, Blingham, the Civil War Roundtable Congress, virtual as well as in-person presentations with the American Civil War Museum, the Gettysburg Heritage Center, the Southern Maryland Civil War Roundtable, and multiple Barnes & Noble's locations. Please, let's give a warm roundtable welcome to Lisa Samia.
Trying to get the video to work first. That's the PowerPoint.
Well, but the video was in the PowerPoint, wasn't it?
It was before. It was two separate.
Oh, well, then.
That is okay.
Tech is not my strong point, so. Well.
Abby, were you able to see it? Were you able to find it? No. Okay. That is totally cool. All right. My glasses. Well, thank you, everyone, for having me. Thank you, Roger, for inviting me, and all you wonderful people here this evening. So I certainly appreciate everybody coming, and we're going to take a little bit of a different look at the Civil War.
It's at least possible.
Oh, yes.
Look. I may have gotten a little confused about your order.
It's before that. Isn't technology fun, everyone?
Nope, not going to work. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
There we go.
Okay. Well, again, thank you, everyone, for coming this evening. The Nameless and the Faceless of the Civil War. These books are a collection of 28 poems and 28 historical essays on the Civil War. And the premise of the books is that not everyone who experienced the Civil War made it into the history books. So what of all those unknowns? By combining the rhyme and narrative of poetry with Civil War history, a lost voice of the past comes forth to share their experience and their suffering. A place where the humanity of history and the songs of the soul come together to create a deeper empathy for those lost and unknown. For in these collections, the lines of the North and South are blurred. There are no border states. There's no governance. There's no politics. For it is my belief that suffering has no boundaries. These poems go beyond the military aspect of the Civil War, beyond the generals, beyond the flanking maneuvers, beyond even who won and who lost. It rests, however, in the souls of the lost and the forgotten. The narrator in the poem recounts a historical scene of the Civil War. Represented here are soldiers, doctors, nurses, and some who experienced the vast pain and misery of the war. In some instances, and in this presentation, the narrator in the poem is identified. And I did that because one of the stories that will be presented to me was so grievous and so heartbreaking, I wanted to share it with you. Let me just get this here, excuse me. Very good. The inspiration for the entire collection comes from a prisoner of war diary of a Union soldier named Michael Doherty. Michael was born in Ireland and would come to reside in Bristol, Pennsylvania. He would go on to earn the Medal of Honor in 1897 for gallantry on October 12, 1863, for his action at Jefferson, Virginia. Michael was in Company B, 13th Volunteer Pennsylvania Cavalry, and was captured multiple times during his time as a soldier, during which times he kept a diary. He spent time at Pemberton's, Libby, Belle Island, and eventually to Andersonville Prison in Andersonville, Georgia. It was while he was imprisoned at Andersonville that the horrors of his confinement were brought to light. The deplorable treatment of the Union prisoners in the summer of 1864 was so dreadful and heartbreaking, it was to read of this treatment and the treatment of all those prisoners. According to the National Park Service, Andersonville National Historic Site began as a stockade, built at about 18 months before the end of the Civil War, to hold Union Army prisoners captured by the Confederacy. Located deep behind Confederate lines, the 26.5-acre Camp Sumter, named for the South Georgia county it occupied, was designed for a maximum of 10,000 prisoners. At its most crowded, it held more than 32,000 men, many of them wounded and starving in horrific conditions, rampant disease, contaminated water, and only minimal shelter from the blazing sun and the chilling winter rains. In the prison's 14 months of existence, some 45,000 Union prisoners arrived there. Of those, 12,290 died. It was to these conditions that Michael arrived at Andersonville in February of 1864. On October 22nd, 1864, he pens a poem of despair. Here is an excerpt. When our country called for men, we came from forge and shop and mill, from workshops, farms, and factories, our broken ranks to fill. We left our quiet northern homes that once we loved so well, to vanquish all the Union foes or fall where others fell. Now in prison dreary languish, and it is our constant cry, "Oh, ye who can yet save us, will you leave us here to die?" After his release from prison in April of 1865, he was sent to Camp Fisk, the parole camp, which was 4 miles from Vicksburg, Mississippi. He was aboard the overcrowded steamship, the Sultana, with over 2,000 recently paroled prisoners of war. On April 27, 1865, the Sultana's boilers exploded just south of Memphis, Tennessee, killing over 1,200 former prisoners and civilians. Not only did he survive Andersonville, but the Sultana as well. An excerpt of Michael's writings during his time in Andersonville said, quote, 100 men a day are dying. But that struck me, that they were just numbers, men without a name or a face. It was words that brought forth the idea of Nameless and Faceless, as I thought of all those who witnessed the Civil War die and lay buried in the thousands upon thousands of unknown graves that marked their final resting place on our Civil War battlefields. It was then I realized it is never just words on a page, but reading into the words and feeling the emotions contained in those words. I cannot give those unknowns a name or a face, but I can give them a voice to tell their stories of compassion, life, death, and grief, as a reminder to all the world that they did not die in vain. Also, it is of my opinion, an author writes from the heart. A poet writes from the soul. And so we begin. The first poem is called My Brother Jacob. And this is a story of two unknown Confederate brothers from Virginia who joined the Confederacy together at the start of the war, but only one would survive the Battle of Gettysburg. The inspiration for the poem is from two brothers who fought for the Confederacy, Colonel William C. Oates and his brother John A. Oates of the 15th Alabama, and two other brothers who fought for the Union 20th Maine are Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain and his brother Tom. Both these sets of brothers would find themselves fighting at Little Round Top on July 2nd, 1863. The result for one set of these brothers would be devastating. My brother Jacob. I will tell you a story right here and now of my brother Jacob, I do avow. You see, it was the spring of '61 when first we knew secession had rung. And my younger brother Jacob, you see, sprang to enlist to defend Virginia, if ever be. I will never forget his fervor and such that asked me to join him. It was too much. For you see, it was me and him and my ma at home. My pa up and died, it was just us alone. My poor ma, she took me aside and she told me with all of her pride, see here, Caleb, as the oldest of my sons. I don't want you to go either, God's will, thy will be done. But go you must, but for the reason I give, watch out for your brother, help him live. For 'tis you we have always relied, and this too, I'm afraid, we must abide. Not to worry about me, my son, she said with a smile. I'll be waiting for you both. I'll be here a while. And so you must go, you must defend our little farm here to the very end. With that said, Jacob and I took our leave. The last sight of my ma caused me to grieve. And the battles that we stayed true, Manassas, Antietam, Fredericksburg, to name a few. Jacob and I, well, we stayed together every time. Shoulder to shoulder it would us find. And after 2 years' time in the battles that bled, comrades killed so much bloodshed that Jacob and I did survive, you see. But it was Gettysburg that would consume me. It was day 3 on this impossibly hot day. I was with Jacob in the tree line with all Virginia, I say, waiting for our commander, General Pickett, to order us men into the battle and out into the glen, to march in the open field about a mile or so, they say, to face the Union artillery along the way. I turned to Jacob as we waited to go and told him, stay close, brother, for I know this day's battle, I believe, will bring much sorrow, I fear, for all of us men and our loved ones' tears. Jacob smiled at me with his usual grin and said, come on, brother, we will win. Then the silence was sliced with the battle din and roar, as General Pickett did state it was for. Remember, men, you are from old Virginia, I heard him say, and so the drums of battle ordered us on our way. Not a sound from the ranks was heard, only the beating drums that was stirred. And so we marched Jacob right by my side. I wanted to grab him, to run and to hide, for in that moment great explosions were all around. The Union Canyon was the most deafening sound, and great groans and cries from the men as one by one they disappeared from the glen. And yet we kept marching, kept going, you see, to the copse of trees where the Union they be. Then it seemed all my life stopped in this place, a great blast near me, hot to my face. I must tell you, I do not remember what happened then. I woke up and lay there for what or how long or when, and realized as I raised my head the battle was over. So many dead in fields of sweet clover. I carefully inspected myself to be sure I was all right, only knocked out in this horrific fight. I rose to my feet and panic struck my heart. Where was Jacob? I could not part. It was then I spied him very near a group of the dead. I went to roust him, to move him away from the hotbed. I knelt beside him, knocked out like me. I cried, Jacob, come on, follow me. Wake up, it's time to go. We will fight another battle, this I do know. I don't know how long. I tried to revive my brother on that field, only when they came and told me to yield. My brother's body to be buried post-haste, no time to mourn, no time to waste. My blood froze even through the blazing heat, my brother's body at my feet. There would be no going home, not for him. I cried in the haze and the din, and thought of my ma and the promise I could not keep. I tried ma to keep him safe, I said and did weep. But God Almighty had other plans for him. This we prayed not to see. For your sweet boy, Jacob, ma, he was not meant to be. Brothers Colonel William C. Oates, Lieutenant John A. Oates, CSA 15th Alabama. Again, the inspiration for the poem is the story of these two brothers who fought together at Gettysburg, one who lived and one who died. That is Colonel William Oates and his younger brother John. The 15th Alabama were heavily engaged during the Battle of Little Round Top on July 2nd. And then defending the Union left was another set of brothers, Colonel Joshua Chamberlain of the 20th Maine and his younger brother Tom. But both those Chamberlain brothers would survive the battle. Colonel Oates would survive, yet his younger brother John would die. His grief at the loss of his brother John is haunting even today. He says, he could never forgive himself for leaving his wounded brother behind on the Gettysburg battlefield. He blamed himself for John's death and every year dreaded the arrival of July 2nd, the anniversary of the day his brother was wounded, and December 24th, the anniversary of his brother's birth. Oates wrote to his son on Christmas Eve 1900 to tell him how that night brought forth a perennial ache in his heart. He said he could feel nothing but sad over his fate, he wrote, adding, had he been killed outright, it would not have been so sad, but he fell into the hands of the enemy and died a prisoner of war. He didn't die right on the battlefield. He died several days later. He was a noble young man and died for his country and a just cause, as he and I both saw it. And I'm sure you've all stood at the base of Little Round Top and where the 15th Alabama were, and it's just to wonder how many countless other brothers met that same fate and how many unknown brothers as well. But Colonel Oates would spend his lifetime trying to find his brother John's gravesite. In 1872, he found out that his remains were shipped to Richmond, Virginia, and interred in Hollywood Cemetery, along with 11 other Confederates marked Box A. Unfortunately, the Gettysburg dead were marked not by individual graves, but by granite blocks designating, I'm sure if you've been to Hollywood, you've seen that, just sections of the plot. Sometime in 1910, however, Box A was reinterred in the cemetery. Thus, Colonel Oates was never able to find his stone. He died that year. The poem, The Basement. We hear from an unknown Confederate soldier who's dying in the basement of the Lutheran Seminary after the Battle of Gettysburg on July 1st through 3rd, 1863. The dying soldier, in his last moment, sees the basement door open and raises his hand to bring attention to his plight. The woman's name and the inspiration for the poem is Sarah Broadhead. The basement. It was so frightfully hot in those early July days. Gettysburg was the name. Oh, the fighting raged, the fife, the drum, the cannon roar. Excuse me. Marching in fours in our corps. The sound of fire, the battle din, our color bearer, our day to win. The artillery that I did see and feel, that bended my knee and made me kneel. Yet I prayed, where are you, God on high, the creator, the one of love, so how I cried. I fired my musket and stood my ground. I had no choice with those people all around. For although I defended my home, my wife, my children there and all my life, I tried to take cover, you see, up by this seminary it was to be. But the mini ball that struck me down leveled me right to the ground. I fell, and all I could see, the soldiers fighting all around me. Then it became quiet from the fire, and the sound of the wounded, it was so dire. I could not speak, I could barely breathe. I crawled to find cover anywhere, you see. A day or two went by, I am not sure, and found myself on a basement floor. But I was not alone, I barely had room for the pile of soldiers and all this gloom. The moans and the bloodshed that echoed within became even louder as the rains began. And soon our haven, filled those souls you see, began to drown in the filth and debris. My breath was fading, my wounds too great, when the basement door opened and I saw her face. With my last ounce of strength, I reached out my arm. I cried out, help me, take me from harm. There were so many of us in that basement, you see, too many wounded with no one to plead. But then the pain that had drained the life from me began to ebb and set me free. The woman came towards me, yet I began to fade from her sight. I was leaving this place to the Almighty's might. There were no more sounds of cries and such. The white light came for me, I felt his touch. And as I began to ascend to this death place, my comrades were with me, blessed by his grace. Sarah Broadhead, Diary of a Lady of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, June 15th to July 15th, 1863. Battle of Gettysburg. History recounts the Union and Confederate forces that converged on the green rolling farmlands here in Gettysburg. For 3 days, the most horrific of battles raged between these massive forces, leaving in its wake a Union victory shrouded by the wounded, the dead, and the missing. The estimated total of casualties for both the Union and the Confederacy would be approximately 51,000. But that's a military number, not the perspective of an inhabitant of Gettysburg during that great battle. It is here that the story of Sarah Broadhead began, a resident of Gettysburg, and the inspiration for the poem, The Basement. She would write of her experiences prior, during, and after the battle, the dead and the dying soldiers strewn about the town with its horrific sights and sounds. She would cook and tend the wounded and comfort the dying. But it was an entry on July 8th, 1863, that was so extraordinary to me, because while she was working and tended the wounding at the Lutheran Seminary, which had been converted into a hospital, she opened the door to the basement and described the following, quote, I found that I had only seen the lighter cases, and worse horrors met my eyes on descending to the basement of that building. Men wounded in 3 and 4 cases, not able to help themselves the least bit, lay almost swimming in the water. I hunted up the lady whom I had been helping and told her to come and see how they were situated. When we came down, she reverently exclaimed, "My God, they must be gotten out of this or they will drown." I gladly, in answer to her request, consented to assist her. She called some nurses to help, and getting some stretchers, the work was begun. There was somewhere near 100 to be removed to the 4th floor of the building. In the poem, The Basement, we hear from a mortally wounded Confederate soldier. On July 4th, 1863, a heavy rain swept through Gettysburg, inundating and flooding the basement of the seminary, where countless soldiers who were too injured to be moved before they drowned. Now, I have visited the Seminary Ridge Museum. It's phenomenal. And there's a representation of the dying soldiers in the basement and a representation of Sarah Broadhead. They're near each other. Just seeing that compelled me to write the poem. And I have subsequently visited the basement of the seminary, and I can assure you the experience was not just riveting, but heartbreaking as well. Actually, when I went down to the basement, I actually did feel the walls of the basement. It is to wonder of the unknowns in that basement, like this Confederate lost to history, no name, no face, yet a voice to tell his story from the despair and agony during and after the Battle of Gettysburg, and the incredible courage and compassion shown by an ordinary citizen and many like her, the citizen whose name was Sarah Broadhead. The Klingle House. This particular poem is from the Nameless and Faceless women of the Civil War. I am very excited to share with you. It was included in the spring issue of America's Civil War magazine. In this poem, we hear the voice of an unknown woman, in this case a Northern mother, who's received a letter from her son Ethan's commanding officer that he was killed during the Battle of Gettysburg. In it, she realizes that after the battle, thousands of soldiers are laid dying or dead in and around the Klingle House, and one of them is her son, Ethan. The Klingle House. My eyes could barely see for the tears that stung my sight of the news my son Ethan had ascended to the Almighty's light. The letter I held in my hand from your commander I see, to tell me of your bravery so that others could be free. In early July of 1863, upon the battlefield of our North, Gettysburg, 'tis the name, so how you did go forth. The 3 days of such fighting, the slaughter I cannot grasp. So many gone like you, my son, I fear I shall collapse. But as I read the letter and heard of how you died, it is as if I can see you, my son, and be there at your side. So now I will take my breath and read the part of your pain, and left this earth a better man. Of this I shall refrain. 'Twas on July the 4th, the holiday of our nation's birth, they found your body, my son. With your comrade next to you, God's will you see was done. It says here you were wounded and tried to take shelter, I see, to the Klingle farm under the porch, yet it was not meant to be. The owner came and found his farm littered with the dead of the 3 days of the din of battle where the nation bled. I see you, my son, under that porch as you tried to save your life, yet God had other plans for you and took you from that strife. There's no more to say just now. The letter, it ends with thanks for the sacrifice of so many, my Ethan in the ranks. The Klingle House was purchased by Daniel Klingle in April of 1863. He lived there with his wife Hannah and 2 little children. Imagine buying that house and then finding out, a couple months later, it's like, whoa, here comes the battle. He was a farmer and a shoemaker, and of course, little did his family realize in just a few months he would lie among the house would lie amidst the bloodiest days of the battle. On July 2nd, 1863, the family was warned by the Union forces to leave their home. On July 4th, the Klingle family returned to their home to a devastating scene. Bullet holes riddled the house and powder marks charred the walls from inside the house where the soldiers had taken refuge during the fight. Crops were destroyed. The farm was covered by the dead. Bodies lay all around the house. 2 were just inside the gate. Excuse me. And 2 others were just under the porch, where they must have crawled to shelter before dying for their wounds. One shattered tree in the Klingels' orchard concealed 4 dead soldiers huddled around a cooking pan with food still in it. Now, I realize this is a very nice photo of the Klingel house. I think it's like 2020, 2021, obviously before all the work to redo it started. I absolutely love this place. We all have our favorite spots in Gettysburg that we gravitate to. For some reason, for me, it is this house. And it's almost for me, as it calls to me time and time again. Of course, I can't stand on it now because it's all, cordoned off. But it's as if the voice of this unknown woman comes to light to tell us of her son, his great sacrifice, and the pride she had in his death. To me, there's a palpable sadness that surrounds this house, silent, quietly heartbreaking, yet brought to life by this unknown mother and son, bound together forever on the fields of a town called Gettysburg. My Henry. The unknown woman in this next poem, called My Henry, has heard President Lincoln is coming to Gettysburg on November 19, 1863, to dedicate the new National Cemetery for the Union Civil War dead. The Battle of Gettysburg was just months before, and this woman's husband, Henry, is one of thousands who died during the battle. She's still suffering at his loss, yet resolves to come to the cemetery to hear President Lincoln. What she hears in the 2-minute address is riveting. She says, "Like poetry from God, I bowed my head to pray." She tries to move through the crowd to see him, to tell him of her Henry, but the crowd is too much for her to get through. And then in an instant, President Lincoln raises his head and their eyes meet. Excuse me. In that instant, she foresees his death in his eyes, and he too knows of his own fate. It binds them together for this one moment in time. Now, I would like just to add a bit more about the look in President Lincoln's eyes. It was this description of that look by our great American poet, Walt Whitman, that inspired this poem. Walt Whitman came to Washington, D.C. during the Civil War. He would spend time visiting the wounded soldiers in various hospitals, reciting his poetry and writing letters for them. From Walt Whitman, I see very plainly Abraham Lincoln's dark brown face with the deep cut and the eyes, and always to me with a deep latent sadness in the expression. We have got so that we always exchange bows, and very cordial ones. He goes on, they, President and Mrs. Lincoln, passed me once very close. I saw the president in the face fully as they were moving slowly, and his look, though abstracted, happened to be directed steadily in my eye. He bowed and smiled, but far beneath his smile, I noticed well the expression I have alluded to. None of the artists or pictures have caught the deep, though subtle and indirect expression of this man's eyes. There is something else. One of the great portrait painters of 2 or 3 centuries ago is needed. That look in President Lincoln's eyes was the look of all the suffering and the feeling that he had for all the soldiers, the civilians, during that Civil War. My Henry. I walked past the patch of earth that housed my Henry, now gone, silenced forever from my sight. God help me, I am so forlorn. Is Gettysburg, I tell you now, whose battle he so valiantly did fight. For our Union he did say, I still love him with all my might. 'Tis November now, 5 months has passed since then, so now our President is here to dedicate our fallen men. And so I heard his words quite beautifully, I do say, like poetry from God above, I bowed my head to pray. It took him just 2 minutes or so, as the words flowed ever so divine. Like manna from heaven that touched the soul, I know that they did mine. Yet as much as I tried to be near him, the crowd in between too great, I wanted to tell our president of my Henry's fate. I had to try to reach him, to tell him of my heart, but it was the look in the eyes that have haunted me, careworn, that gave me a start. For in those eyes it seemed to me he too knew of his fate and would come to rest, I am sure, in the glory of heaven's gate. The Gettysburg Address, November 19th, 1863. Yet such comfort did she take away from the president in his brief speech, just 272 words that would describe his compassion and his resolution and faith, the words that defined what was happening to his nation. He would end up sacrificing his own life for the freedom and liberty of all his people. On November 19th, 1863, on a platform erected in neighboring Evergreen Cemetery, President Lincoln had said in his Gettysburg Address, "It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that the government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth." I have visited the cemetery, I'm sure many of you have, obviously, stood near the spot where the President Lincoln delivered his address, and it's impossible not to be humbled by the rows and rows of Union dead, some of which are unknown. It is to imagine back to those dark days of the Civil War, picturing the president and the crowd all around him, and then to a woman, an unknown woman, coming to hear him speak and meet his eyes, and in that moment find solace in his immortal words and hope for the country and his people. There are 979 unknown soldiers in the National Cemetery. I would just like to take a moment here to bring your attention, and I'm sure you've noticed it, to the many instances in the poems where God is mentioned. I included the outpouring of man to God as to understand the importance of God in faith before and during and after the Civil War. In the mid-1800s, the United States experiences a wave of Christianity, meaning the strong belief in church, the relationship of God, church, and the community. That is why so many of my poems, the outcry is, God help me. Also included in this strong faith was the belief in the good death, right? They believed to experience a good death would be to prepare for one's death, to die at home with loved ones around you, to hear your last words, and to be assured that you will all be reunited in your faith together. The Civil War and its sudden and violent deaths made the good death impossible. The only way they knew, the Civil War soldiers that lay dying on the battlefield would often try to recreate the good death by surrounding themselves, often clutching photos and letters of their loved ones in their way of having them close by as they pass away. It's so heartbreaking. I'm sure you've seen them where they're laying out like this and they're clutching photos and letters and the such. That is the soldier trying to recreate the good death. Remember earlier on I mentioned there was going to be a poem where we know who's speaking. And I did this because of this young, brave woman, Tilly Pierce. Tilly Pierce was born in 1848 in Gettysburg. She was just 15 years old when the battle was fought. She watched the Union Army march through town, and at the urging of her family, Tilly and some friends left town and went to what they believed would be a safe haven, right, at Jacob Weikart's farmhouse. During the battle, Tilly provided water and food to the soldiers and assisted the surgeons and nurses who were caring for the wounded. On July 7th, she went back to her home. She said the whole landscape had been changed, and I felt as though we were in a strange and blighted land. She continued to help care for the wounded after the battle. 25 years later, she wrote a book about her experiences during that time at Gettysburg, or what a girl saw and heard of the battle. What was her name? July 2nd, 1863, at Little Roundtable was where you'd find me. I was there in command and to defend that piece of ground until the end. I am Brigadier General Stephen Weed from Staten Island, New York, is bittersweet. And on that most terrifying day, when the rebels stormed up into the fray, my men of the 3rd Brigade, 2nd Division, and 5th Corps of the Army of the Potomac in this Civil War fought the onslaught of the rebel fire, Alabama and Texas, it was so dire. I was with Lieutenant Charles Hazlitt, you see, of Battery D, 5th Artillery, of 5th U.S. Artillery, I do decree, and watched as he was struck down with mortal fire, died by his battery, it was hellfire. Then in a blink of an eye, I felt the lifeblood ebb from me. It was my time, you see. I was paralyzed, and as I was removed from the field to a farmhouse of the Union, wounded where our men would yield. It was called the Weikart Farm, I heard in my malaise, as I lay in a room in the basement haze. Then a young girl came into the room I could see and held a candle and sat by me. She talked with me until my brethren returned and promised she would visit me again, I did learn. So dear and kind was this child's face. I asked her name before God's impending grace. My brethren said Tilly Pierce was her name. She was tending the Union, he did exclaim. She said she would return at the first morning light. But I knew God had other plans for me. I was in his sight. And as I ascended to the throne, I saw the young girl who was known. Tilly Pierce, I said her name, whose kindness to me would forever refrain. Tilly Pierce and General Stephen Weed. I'm going to read a little bit of the interaction when she finds out that it was the general. This is from her book. She says, "The poor wounded soldier's eyes followed me, and the last words he said to me were, 'Now don't forget your promise. Now don't forget your promise.' I replied, 'No, indeed,' and expressing the hope that he would be better in the morning, bade him good night. The sun was high in the heavens when I awoke the next day. My first thought that came into my mind was my promise of the night before. I hastened down to the little basement room, and as I entered, the soldier lay there, dead. His faithful attendant was still at his side. I had kept my promise, but he was not there to greet me. I hope he greeted nearer and dearer faces than that of an unknown little girl on the Battle of Gettysburg. As I stood there gazing in sadness at the prostrate form, the attendant looked up to me and asked, 'Do you know who this is?' 'No, sir,' I replied. He said, 'This is the body of General Weed, a New York man.'" Imagine being 15 years old, facing the bloodiest battle that was ever fought on U.S. soil. And this is what exactly happened to Tilly Pierce, a teenager who became an unlikely heroine for her bravery and her compassion and her selflessness as a young girl. Tilly and other young women like her found themselves caught up in the chaos during this critical 3-day battle. Without training, but with enormous courage and compassion, Tilly and other Gettysburg citizens helped and comforted so many wounded soldiers. I will now read a poem from my new Nameless and Faceless collection. The name of the poem is called Under the Dogwood Tree. It tells of two friends and soldiers who were fighting together during the Battle of the Wilderness in May of 1864. In this particular instance, when I wrote this poem, neither the side of the North or the South was identified. It's just how it came to me. The inspiration for the poem comes from Drew Gilpin's Faust's book, The Republic of Suffering, and the PBS documentary, Death in the Civil War. If you have not seen that, it's unbelievably done, well done. For we know there were instances where a soldier would write to a fallen soldier's family to try to describe or identify where they lay buried. Perhaps they would try to carve their name on a rough piece of board on a tree, and in an instance, sometimes place a small hand-drawn map with directions as to how and where to find him. Under the dogwood tree. I take my pencil to tell you now of how your son died that day upon the battlefield of the wilderness. Please read on as I say. It was a time of day called twilight. Of this I do believe, that we marched and I saw him fall, so how I do now grieve. I dropped my musket amidst the shot and fire, and knelt beside him. I knew then it was so dire. But I was ordered double quick to my feet and hurried on my way. Yet I knew I would come back to find him somewhere in the fray. Later I asked to search for him in between the lines of dread, but I was denied and had to wait and watched as the river ran red. Then next I was ordered into the field where our soldiers lay without breath, as the grim reaper gathered his harvest in anticipation of so much death. And as I began to dig to bury your son, I knew I had to do more. I snipped a locket of his bright blonde hair and sent to you to adore. Also you will find a map of where I laid him to rest. I drew it as best I could to guide you in your quest. And as the pink petals of the dogwood tree rained down upon my face, that I could not leave him there without a name or without a face. I pray then you will find your soldier son. Of this I do decree. Look for him there, if you can, under the dogwood tree. Once again, in conclusion, I would like to conclude with the words of our great American poet, Walt Whitman. An excerpt from The Million Men, 1865. His poetic work from this time are without question the most heartbreaking and heartfelt. Here in these few words, he captures the essence of the nameless and the faceless of the Civil War. The Million Men, 1865, Walt Whitman. The dead, the dead, the dead, our dead, for South or North, ours all, our young men, once so handsome and so joyous, taken from us, the son from the mother, the husband from the wife, the dear friend from the dear friend. And everywhere among these countless graves we see, and ages yet may see, on monuments and gravestones, singly or in masses, the thousands or the tens of thousands, the significant word, unknown. Thank you all very much. absolutely. Anyone has any, I would be happy to share any of my experiences or inspirations. If anyone has anything. Yes.
What first got you started on the Civil War?
The question is, what got me started on the Civil War? Actually, I was recovering from a health crisis, and I was home resting in bed on long intervals. And my wonderful husband bought me the Ken Burns series, and I played that for hours and hours and hours. And then once I was better, he took me to Washington, D.C., and my first battlefield I saw was Manassas, and then the second was Gettysburg, and of course, our love of our President Lincoln. That got me started, so thank you. Anyone else have any questions? Oh, thank you very much. Thank you, I appreciate that. Thank you. It's a little bit different look, that's for sure.
Well, we do want to thank you, Lisa, for
Thank
being
you.
here tonight, and we'd like to present you
Oh, my.
with a little plaque of our appreciation. You have to come out here because Lynn has to take pictures.
Oh, my, thank you. This is so lovely. Thank you. The husband has to come too.
Yeah,
Here
okay,
it comes.
come on out.
Thank you. Thank you.
This has been just wonderful.
Oh, I'm so glad you all
appreciate
enjoyed it. Labor of love. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
And
so
that's for
much.
you
Oh,
also.
oh, thank you.
Thank you for coming
Thank
tonight.
you. It's a
Yep.
pleasure.
All right.
Thank you, everybody.
So to be clear, our next adventure is on the battlefield, Hancock Avenue, June 8th.
You got it. 9:30.
9:30 in the morning. And then we've got battlefield adventures each fourth Thursday evening in June, July, and August. And we're back here in September. Okay. And have a great summer.